Hey guys, this is going to be a bit of a weird one because first of all, I've actually got some experience of using things like Tinder and so on in the past year, and that's weird, and it's a whole weird thing, and I want to get into it. Secondly, you can actually watch me teach this session. I recorded this session last year. It was the last day before the lockdown, or before the university shut down last year. It wasn't before lockdown. I think lockdown came like a week later. So I actually took a video camera in because I knew a lot of people wouldn't be there. You know, it was difficult. You know, people was actually emailing in saying they couldn't attend. So I took a camera with me off Pete, went into the lecture theatre, recorded the whole thing, and I put that video up for you guys with this one as well. But I wanted to do a specific video about this because I have something to bring to the table here. I didn't have anything to bring to the table last year because I had never used dating apps of this kind. Now, I'd used dating apps like before they were even apps, like long time ago, online dating, you know, web-based online dating. But in the interim period since things like Tinder became popular, which would be around 2011, 2012, I've never been anywhere near them. I'm teaching these sessions, right, and I'm relying a lot on people in the room to show some investment in it because I know that people use these things, and you know we'll get into that in the seminar. But there is a general reluctance to it. But now I can bring my own horror stories about using this crap, and you know how it just defeats you as a human being. So this will all be fun. So the lecture is Love in the Digital Age, Tinder, Intimacy and Social Cohesion. And I want to get into these two elements in particular, intimacy and social cohesion, how they've been remediated by social media based applications. And one thing I want to stress more than anything is that things like Tinder are social media. You know, you build a profile, right? You have images, you build up something and you make connections on them. So it fits all that stuff that Dana Boyd and Nicole Ellison were talking about when they defined social media, and we looked at right back in the first lecture. All of this fits in there. So this is a valid form of social media to look at. So this is only one video today, by the way. I mean, we'll be heavily leaning on the seminar this week and what we do in the seminar this week, as I always do with this topic. So how have people argued that social media has caused a decline in social cohesion, first of all, which kind of leads us into these applications? Why has there been a rise in the use of these applications? What are the effects on dating apps in terms of overall culture of intimacy in society? And how do dating apps work as an extension of a social media culture that we've been looking at? First point of view is when we look at social cohesion. We begin with Sherry Turkle. Now, Sherry Turkle is a very well-known academic and a very accomplished academic. Her focus is always on how technology changes the way that we communicate, and so therefore she's, broadly speaking, a McLuhanist in that she looks in that lens of how the medium is the message. The message for her is always changes in communication and changes in communication style and changes in communication form. So what McLuhan? Oh, she wishes and he wishes. Sherry Turkle argues is that organic and authentic interactions have become degraded through digital media use and constant exposure to meaningless interactions with different forms of AI which never actually give authentic responses. So what Turkle argues in Alone Together in particular, which is getting on a bit as a book now, so it's like 2011, but I think there's still some very pertinent things for this topic in Alone Together. What Sherry Turkle ostensibly is arguing is that our forms of communication online, you know, shortened messages, use of imagery, use of memes, use of emojis, etc., is a degradation of what we actually do as communication practice. It's a degradation of things over time, and this has a very demonstrable effect. So communication organized by algorithm, and it's inauthentic in its character because we can't communicate as we might want to. So we pay little attention, therefore, to one another in this age of mass distraction and an attention economy. This leads to very shallow relationships, and a reliance on friends' advice about things prevents any notions of self-reflection, leading to less personal independence. It's kind of a bleak view that Turkle puts forward. You know, it's a really bleak view, and it's one that kind of endorse. I don't think it's uniform in that way, but I think, you know, Sherry Turkle does make some very, very pertinent points that still hold a lot of weight, some, you know, nearly 10 years after this book was published. So, you know, Turkle's idea here is that the forms of communication that we have adopted as social media users has led us towards much shallower forms of relationship, and therefore consequently less intimacy in our personal lives and in general society. Okay, that's all I want to talk about social cohesion. Basically, Sherry Turkle has pitched up for us, and I'm going to knock it out of the park. So, in terms of Tinder, then, what is Tinder? Obviously, Urban Dictionary. I have to go to Urban Dictionary for a definition, right? Dating app. Tinder is the McDonald's for sex. Deeply integrated into the wider social media context. You know, you can join with Facebook, you can share photos, there's quantification going on, you know, there's data being accumulated, you know, there's data being shared. So the social, if you like, the economics of social media is replicated in Tinder very, very clearly. First point I want to make about Tinder is, you know, on this question of intimacy. What David and Cambry in 2016 called the swipe logic, and I think it is very, very important because this spreads to other dating apps as well. You know, you can look at, for example, Bumble, which has the same kind of interface as Tinder, and you know, various other ones as well, which have this swipe element to it. Even Facebook now has Facebook dating, which must be unspeakably grim. You know, it must make plenty of fish look like some kind of nirvana. But I think it also depends. I think I read this when I was looking at how it had been set up. It also basically adopts that kind of swipe element to it. So what David and Cambray argue is that intimacy and the very process of intimacy itself and how we establish intimacy is disrupted totally by the immediacy and the acceleration provided by Tinder and other applications. The very processes by which we establish intimacy with other people at the beginning of relationships are shortcut by these applications and the immediacy and acceleration of things that they provide, and therefore, if you like, we miss out on intimacy, we don't learn intimacy, and we don't value intimacy because it becomes less of a part of how we establish relationships themselves, how we build the initial steps of a relationship. And the gesture of the swipe is absolutely critical in understanding the discourses and mediation in the social media age, in the mediation of intimacy. Intimacy in terms of taking time, meeting people, learning about them, learning their qualities, learning etc., has been replaced by an instantaneous swipe of someone based on what they look like. So there's a reduction down to the aesthetic, first of all, and a reduction down to this very, very casual sort of motion that we go through when we're using dating apps. According to David and Cambry, this is, you know, a very, very potentially difficult thing, and, you know, something which really can affect the way that we actually approach relationships and we engage in relationships. So to capture attention and stand out in social media influence, dating profiles have to be differentiated. And here we can refer to Goffman's idea of the front stage and backstage dichotomy for the selfies lecture. We're involved, if we're using these applications, in a process and a performance of self-promotion and you know, real self-selling going on. You know, and some people do it better than most. I mean, check this. Ah, wait there. That way, no, wait, what is going on? Because it's reversing me. That is so weird. You check out, you know, this young lady's blurb. You know, I think that's a fairly effective way of doing things on Tinder. You know, although I really, really don't want to meet her boyfriend. And you know, we are involved in self-presentation in an extremely overt way. We are not just playing a role here. We're playing an absolutely idealized version of ourselves. In terms of authenticity, you know, an extremely simple app interface codes itself as less intimidating than a face-to-face encounter, so that, you know, that can actually be a very positive thing. But images become crucial, functioning as if they're bait and tempting to other users to connect. Users present an idealized or attractive image, not the self that is a factor in intimacy itself. So in terms of how we authentically exist on dating apps, the simple truth is we don't. You know, and it is the authentic us, it is who we are, that eventually will become involved in intimate relationships with other people. But that is not what is portrayed on social media apps at all, on social media dating apps like Tinder, for example. I mean, if you look at Duguay's work on authenticity on Tinder, he links up to Giddings. This is the ability to have a reference to a coherent biographical narrative to one's life that I talked about way back at the beginning of this module. Can Tinder even frame authenticity in that way? I very much doubt it. Tinder is about the instant. It is about the now. It is about instantaneous connection and communication. It is not about having a life history per se, and we don't want to put our life history. If we get to my age, where your life history looks like, you know, ooh, disaster, ooh, disaster, ooh, disaster, ooh, disaster, you know, damaged goods much? You know, you don't want to do that kind of thing. You want to portray yourself in a particular way. You know, you hide that stuff away. This is really, really problematic when it comes to establishing relationships with people, because as we hide away and take off the rough edges of our life in this way, we are parking up problems for the future, basically. We are storing stuff up. So if we do start a relationship with somebody based on an impression that we've created on one of these applications, we are simply going to store up more problems for later, and that is a real issue here. What else is problematic on this in terms of, you know, how social media and the interface has, you know, affected things? Well, catfishing and trolling are immense problems on these apps. Online behaviors may offer opportunity for very much new antisocial behaviors. So March, let's all explore the occurrence of trolling on Tinder. Trolling behaviors on Tinder were associated with high indicators of psychopathy and sadism. And we do, there is a lot of psychopathy and sadism out there, clearly, from my experience. And psychopathy moderates relations between dysfunctional impulsivity and trolling, basically. So a lot of people are testing high for psychopathy measures if we look at their Tinder profiles and behavior. So trolling may not account for hostile antisocial behaviors observed on apps. It could be something much more fundamental than that. It could be, you know, significant health issues, and we need to think of that in terms of what the app is asking us to do. It's asking us to make instantaneous judgments on people. Now, that instantaneous nature of the judgment, indeed the instantaneous nature of the gesture, refers us forward to a sort of instantaneous mode of communication. You know, you match up with somebody on Tinder, then, you know, either you or they send a message. What happens if that message sits there for 12, 14 hours? Well, people might start to go nuts, because this whole thing has been accelerated, right? And what you see is increases in just pestering behavior at the base level, up to full-on trolling, up to abusive messages, you know, and real scurrilous abuse going on, because people have lives, they have jobs, they have other responsibilities. You know, it is difficult to actually make time to do some of these things at times. And therefore, we see occurrences of behavior which you wouldn't necessarily see in traditional dating, although, believe me, I haven't been old enough to give an honest opinion on this. There was plenty of psychopathy and sadism before these applications existed. Gestures such as pinching, dragging, scrolling, zapping, and clicking foster connections primarily using images and foster an image of speed. And it is this speed and acceleration which I want to draw on here. If through my own experience, it means everything gets speeded up. And indeed, the fundamental basis of relationships seem to get speeded up through the use of these interfaces. You know, you start very quickly and everything goes really, really quickly. That's not always a great thing, because users seamlessly immerse themselves in this mediated or presumed intimacy created by these applications too. We think that talking to people on these applications is a form of intimacy, but it is really isn't. It's distanced. It's, you know, it's presumed intimacy rather than actual intimacy. We are performing roles on it. The other person is very often performing a role on it, and this is extremely difficult. And of course, we are subject to quantification. You know, I've looked previously at Lee Humphrey's work on the quantified self. If you look at on the qualified self, I should say, on the quantified self by Deborah Lupton, we must consider that dating apps are aggregators of data, and they construct data-informed profiles to match people up. Of course, you know about Match.com or eHarmony. So they rely on data, first of all, for their business model, but secondly, in order to construct our dating profiles and who we are matched up with. Now, what's problematic about that is the data comes from us, so the data can often be biased. And secondly, we are still providing data into this, you know, massive big data machine, which, you know, compromises our privacy as individuals. And the idea here, of course, is, you know, things like eHarmony and Match sell themselves on being so accurate and being able to, you know, create the perfect match for you based on data. It's a nonsense. You know, they've designed algorithms to do this in particular ways, but please, you know, your algorithm is based on a certain set of assumptions and a certain set of ideas about what relationships should be like. And, you know, at best, we should question whether these techniques would ever be useful at work. So, in terms of personal connections in the digital age, then, where does this leave us? Well, if you look at Nancy Bain's work, according to Nancy, online dating is actually now normalized. Now, I used to do online dating like, oh God, must be like more than 10 years ago now. It was a long time ago. And even at the time, it was kind of weird. It was getting normal at that point. But people would say, you know, people would ask me, you know, what are you doing? And I'm just like, oh, I got a profile on like OkCupid or something like that. And they were like, oh my God, online dating, that's really odd. What if you meet a psycho? And it's like, what if she meets a psycho, dude? You know, me. You know, that's what you should be concerned about here. And it still had a bit of a stigma around it. Now, Nancy Bain identifies by 2015 that stigma is gone. This is an absolutely normalized way of constructing relationships in contemporary society. We think, or we believe at least, and Nancy sort of outlines an argument to this, that it reduces what we perceive as uncertainty in people, because you can have common interest, you can have focused communications over a period of time. It does perhaps reduce some of the uncertainties that we would have around dating other people, and lowers therefore the social risk of communication. But still, this is very primarily based on appearance all the time, you know. And one thing I struggle with is appearance, you know, and as you can tell. But, you know, actually the pose, I just can't pose for photographs. I don't know how to take photographs. I'm just horrendous at photographs, right? So I'm never going to be successful on these applications because, you know, it's not happening, right? You know, I can't not do a full smile because I'm a miserable, cynical bastard, all right? So it cannot be done for me, you know, and so therefore, you know, you've got to consider that a lot of people are kind of setting up those who are not photogenic are kind of, what happens? You know, it's really, really difficult. In summary, I told you this was going to be a short one because we are going to look at the seminar in these issues in more detail. And of course, you have my wonderful teaching from last year. For those of you who forgot that I actually am a teacher and not a little square in a corner of a PowerPoint presentation, dating apps for me are a natural extension of social media. They share a lot of the same features and they share the same with a lot of economics. And even these dating apps are deeply integrated in existing social media forms. Therefore, we can apply a lot of the same criticisms, and in particular, we can look at things like Goffman's work, and we can come to a lot of conclusions. So if you're doing your work on dating apps, trace backwards into these things. You know, there's a lot to be said there. And also look at Sherry Turkle, of course, and look at some of the other people that I've mentioned in this PowerPoint. Okay, guys, until the seminar where we will get into this. Cheers.